Nope, probably still a bit too bright. So good at this. So good at this. That's all I can see is white face. Alrighty. Well, hello. My name is Roy. Welcome to Escaping Dystopia. We are wildly prepared this evening for tonight's show. So, real quick, I was going to try... yeah. Whoa. Alright, maybe that does it. Is that there? I'm sorry. Still trying to work out the lighting, because we had the other stuff. Hold on. Let me try something else. Is that even it out a little bit? Alright. We'll try that. I guess. I don't know. Anyway, so we're going to try a little bit of a new format tonight, and my whole lighting situation is kind of screwing that up. The idea would be, at least for the get-go, the first kind of run-through, just to kind of go through some of the major news stories for this week, at least from what I thought was important, and go with a little bit more just a straight rundown on what happened, and then the second go-through, talk a little bit more about some of the implications of that. So... to get started right away, big story for this week, we had Supreme Court Justice Anthony Kennedy announced that he was going to retire at the end of this term, which I believe ends at the end of the month. This, of course, being a new Supreme Court vacancy coming up. So they'll be talking about that in the Senate soon. Also, today there was the official ruling from the Supreme Court that the third attempt for the president's Muslim ban, which became a travel ban, was approved by the Supreme Court in a 5-4 decision. In immigration and Congress, the quote-unquote compromise bill that the Republicans wanted to bring to the table failed to pass and actually got less votes than the previous conservative version of the bill. So that failed as well today, so Congress isn't going to pass that. There was a court ruling in California that they needed to start to put all these kids who have been taken from their families back with their families and have 30 days to do so. The government was given 30 days to return these children to their families. That court ruling is currently, I think, one of the things that's kind of guiding principles on this. We'll talk about that big court ruling. Oil prices popped today after the U.S. announced that it was going to enforce the embargo, essentially, on Iranian oil. Beginning in November, and no waivers would be given for that. From the North Korea update, there's no timeline for denuclearization, according to the Secretary of State. They announced that today, or a couple days ago actually, that there wasn't going to be any change to the timeline, or there was no current timeline for denuclearization, because there wasn't one in the agreement, so there was a question about if there had been one, and there was officially no timeline. There's also news reports today that there has been activity at a testing site in North Korea, that they apparently are upgrading one of their nuclear testing facilities. The demographics update, posted about this earlier this week on just the straight facts. It appears that for the first time, really, in the history of the United States, the number of white people has gone down. Also, a little bit on that demographic update, there were some major upsets in Democratic politics. We'll talk about that on the second run-through. The Germany comparison. Germany, prior to becoming Nazi Germany, was known for its hardworking, law-abiding, generally good, industrious citizens. We'll talk about that a little bit later. The civility debate, which we'll talk about. Just a few facts on that. The President of the United States was a birther. Didn't think the previous president was actually a legitimate president. And he also literally advocated violence multiple times. The current Speaker of the House, Paul Ryan, in 2012 was on stage with I believe it was a baker who refused service to the vice president and president while they were campaigning near him. In trade war news, Harley Davidson has announced that they are going to be moving some of their production overseas in order to avoid the tariffs that the president has put in place. In science news, dust storm on Mars. It's most likely going to be, unfortunately, bringing the end to opportunity. The dust storm has expanded and apparently is now covering the whole planet. Dust storms there are not quite like it was in The Martian. Apparently the thin atmosphere makes it very hard for them to move stuff, but they do block the sun. Opportunity was there. I think we sent it in 2003, and it was supposed to last for 90 days. So that gives you a little bit of the over-science we've been doing on Mars, which is awesome. Sorry. I'm supposed to keep opinion out of this first part. And the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Association, NOAA, which had been one of the partners for NASA for doing a lot of climate change research, will no longer do that kind of climate change research because they're not going to do that anymore. They changed that from their mission statement. So, that was the facts version, right? So now if you don't want to hear my opinions on things, I guess, go away! No, I'm just kidding. So I've kind of wanted to do that for a little bit. Tonight was the first test run. This whole thing, we're still trying to figure out how to present information to you folks in a way that we all enjoy. But, so that's what I'm going to try and do from now on, and try and have that first run through be pretty clean as far as jokes and opinion and all the fun stuff. And then we can try and get to that a little bit more now here on this second run through. I noticed before when I was doing the live stuff, right? So you start in live, nobody's going to start doing it. But then people see that you've been doing it for 20, 30 minutes. And like, hey, what's going on over here? And I tend to have the most people join in near the end. So what not and therefore anyway. So going back, the Supreme Court. So we knew this was possibility. We knew this was what was up for debate. I think the right wing, the Republicans, have a little bit and had a little bit much better. I think understanding of the issue, right? That what we were voting on in 2016 was in fact the Supreme Court for the next 20 or 30 years. And I think they got that. It was one of the things I remember thinking about near the end of October. And I think I was writing about it like, oh man, if we win this will just totally put them on the end of the culture war and we'll control the Supreme Court basically through the rest of the lives of most of the baby boomers. And that would have gotten us beyond them being able to destroy the country. Instead, we have a couple things. I guess I can go in a couple orders because there's a couple huge Supreme Court things. The Muslim ban. So in a 5-4 ruling, again with that stolen Gorsuch seat being the deciding factor, the court decided that what the president has said in public many, many, many times, that the ban was intended to be against Muslims, that was the whole point of it, they ruled that what he said in public didn't matter. And basically gave them the green light, as long as it doesn't say specifically here in the rule that you're going after these people, that it just happens to be that way is I guess a coincidence. The thing that's really odd about the Supreme Court ruling is it's the exact opposite of what they found when they were talking about it the other way. Like when they talked about the court, the ruling for the baker guy whose name escapes me for the moment. Paradise Bakery. Anyway, in there they ruled that public comments by a public official who had some control over that, right, who was making that ruling from the commission, their public comments in that case were prejudicial. But here in this case, when the president's many speeches and many comments directly talking about the purpose behind his ban, the Supreme Court said that didn't matter. it was really interesting, too, the two opinions, both the dissent from Kagan, from Sotomayor, and the overall opinion from Roberts, the Chief Justice, mentioned Korematsu. And they actually officially, I guess, overturned Korematsu, which is, if you're not familiar with it, and I'm acting like I've known it forever, that was the Supreme Court decision that said what the military did in order to deal with the executive order during World War II was perfectly legal. What the executive order said was that we need to be safe in certain areas from possible foreign influences. What the military did with that was intern Japanese citizens. So just so you know, the order originally didn't say, go intern Japanese citizens. The order said, you need to go do something to secure the homeland. And what the military did was intern Japanese citizens. And so in the ruling for Roberts for the majority, he overturned that and said it was wrong. But I have to look at exactly that, because in the dissent, Sotomayor specifically mentioned that this decision would go down in history as a similar problem to what we had with Korematsu, where it, from the perspective of history and when we don't have that national security, whatever, boondoggle, I guess, that's the thing that's so odd about this too, because apparently if the president writes down that it's for national security, any kind of superficial explanation on how that relates to national security is permissible, whereas consistent public comments that the law is actually intended to be prejudicial on religious grounds were dismissed. And that's why, again, that's kind of the whole reason for the title of tonight's show. Because I do think with that decision, which was with the court we had, and then we had that swing vote retire, so they're going to be replaced. I actually had the senator here, one of my senators, the pseudo-sane one, Bennett, say, well, I hope this is going to lead to a nice consensus pick from the president. No, they're going to pick a right-wing radical who's maybe 25, who can sit on the court for 60 years, and they're going to push him through with 51 votes. The massive hypocrisy from Mitch McConnell on this will be apparent, and they'll probably... I hope that... I'm curious to see how much the Democrats will fight. Because hopefully... I think a lot of them are realizing now that maybe we should have fought harder last time. But I think some of the more... other ones... or some folks have said, well, what could we have done differently? Which... I think there's more than one thing that they could have done to try and bring a vote for an empty Supreme Court seat that was empty for nearly a year, and that the Majority Leader McConnell just refused to bring up for a vote. I think there was some more they could have done. We'll see what they try and do to slow this down now that McConnell has completely reversed things and claimed now that, of course, we need to seat him as soon as possible before the next election. Whereas the last time, we had to wait for another election before we could seat anyone. It's the hypocrisy is difficult to deal with. And that's one of the things, too. We'll get to that later with the civility debate. But I personally don't find that you should respond to blatant hypocrisy with respect, per se. I think when someone is doing that, they have no respect for you. And when somebody treats you like that and goes back on their word and tries to play that thing, they have no respect for you. And so your obligation of respect and response is open, fairly open. But yeah, when somebody lies like that, a big lie of the immigration debate that comes in the national security banning certain immigrants, people even coming from those countries, is this big lie, right? That there was a huge danger from these countries. That's the same lie he's selling about immigration. The data is clear across basically anything except for anti-immigrant groups that make up stuff. Immigrant communities have less crime than native ones. And that's the whole reason for this. Is like this carnage and slaughter of this crime wave that doesn't exist. And the way that they've tried to manufacture it is to criminalize the immigration system and then use that to justify the crackdown on this massive amount of crime that they've now made exist by changing how they implement rules. That was what was so disgusting about this child separation system, or thing that's still going on, by the way. And we'll talk about that a little bit later, because the shtick that they're trying to claim is that, well, it's the law, it's not our fault. We just had this slight interpretation of now we're going to enforce the law for everyone, and, well, gosh, we can't keep the kids with them, so we have to take the kids away, so it's not us. We don't have a policy of child separation, right? Just like there was never a policy of Japanese internment. But that's what happened to implement the policy. So you have to be really aware of this, because this is where we're going, and we're doing this right now in a time of full employment and good economics where we are not literally at world war. So speaking of this, real quick, the compromise bill failed. The Republicans could have fixed this, right? They could have put forth a bill that has the support of some Republicans and all the Democrats, just like we had to do when Obama was president, and they would have gotten something across the line. The Senate could have passed it. We could have fixed this. They didn't do that. They put this compromise bill, got less votes than the hardline conservative bill, and the reason it did is because all those hardlines switched to voting against it because they weren't going to stick their neck out and vote for something that had amnesty, which it did not have. So they voted, so it failed miserably, and they're not going to bring up anything else for this session. What does that mean for Dreamers? Well, right now I believe there's only a single court stay that's keeping them in the country. And if that goes away, which I think it could at nearly any day, because there is no legislation, they will round them up and kick them out. And they'll blame the Democrats for it. Just so you know how the lies are going to come. So there was a court ruling that says that the government has to reunite all these families within 30 days. This is not a small ruling, not a little thing. We'll see how this plays out. Again, one of the first pardons that the president gave was to Sheriff Arpaio, who had his racist policies and then ignored a court order, which is what got him into trouble. That's what he pardoned him for. Pardon me. So we have that ruling. We'll have to follow up on that a little bit later. Quick thing, oil prices. Oil prices spiked a little bit today, like 4%, because they decided that what we're going to do, because we got out of the Iran deal, we are now going to enforce the idea that anybody who buys Iranian oil cannot trade with us. This is part of the isolation trade war that's going to really, really screw over our economy coming later. We'll see. There's going to be some interesting moves for this. Now, this is going to drive up oil prices, which is good for oil companies and Mr. Putin. Sucks for American consumers, but again, if the economy is good, it's hard to blame people. And people won't agree. Like, if the economy was much worse, the outcry for this child separation would be much lower. And if we were in the midst of some sort of major economic crisis and they put some forth of these kind of policies in that are like, wait, they took 100,000 people and did what with them? So I don't want to increase folks' anxiety. I want people to be aware of what the potentials are, right? Because the whole point of the show, right, we want to escape dystopia. So we want to be aware of what's potential and what the possibilities are that we're facing right now. So those Iran sanctions are hitting in November, so keep an eye out. If you have some way to short oil or buy like a bunch now, before then, probably a good idea. North Korea update. So there's no timeline for denuclearization. There's no, they have this many nukes, and by this date they'll have that many nukes, and by that date they'll have that many nukes. There is nothing like that at all. I don't know when we're going to, or if we're going to see anything like that. since the president has already claimed that they have gotten rid of everything and it's already over and the threat is done, he's given them a great deal of leverage to show him that's not the case. I think it's because when you bluff and then you claim to have won and the hand's not over yet, I don't think you're going to win that hand. So we'll see what's happened. Like I said, he's claimed total victory. They just had news reports today that they're updating one of their nuclear testing facilities in some manner. So we'll see how that plays out. So I'm just going to keep talking about it until it happens. Oh, I didn't actually have it on the list, but we'll do a quick Russia update. Apparently, the latest is that we're going to have a summit, and Putin's going to be here in the White House. So that's his punishment for meddling in the election and tearing apart American democracy, is the summit in the White House. Bolton has already been over there and kissed his ass pretty good. So he's acting, our president is acting, continues to act, I should say, like an agent of a foreign nation. Yay! Always good times. The demographics update. So we talked about this a little bit earlier. For the first time in the history of the country, there's less white people than there were last year. This has been something that we knew was going to happen, but we have crossed over that line this year while this other stuff is going. So for the long view, folks, again, 20, 30 years, this will be a much different country. The question is, how difficult is it going to be to make it a country that most people are happy with in those 20, 30 years down the road, if we can move to something now smoothly that's nice, or if it's just going to be ratcheting up the pressure until things break and then they try again. But the demographics are shifting very quickly against the current power structure. And the laws that are being put in place are going against that demographic change. One of the big things about and I talked about this earlier, the big tax cut that passed this year that was supposed to increase wages but actually just went to stock buybacks and was wonderful for investors. So most of the way this works demographically is most of the investors in the investor class in this country, not so much white, but definitely older, and workers definitely skew younger. So you took this huge tax cut, which will increase debt that workers alive now will have to pay for, that also led to a huge shift of wealth to basically retirees and people who aren't in the workforce, and while workers got very, very, very little as far as just a direct response, as far as part of the money that was created through the tax cuts, that extra. Most of it went to stock buybacks, which, again, from the economic standpoint, well, we got this extra money. We don't have particular capital needs. We don't have to pay more for labor. We just got this huge windfall. What's the easiest, most direct way to reward our shareholders? We'll buy shares. We'll kick up their prices. Boom, 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 done. Don't even have to think about it. Nobody's going to give me shit at the shareholders meeting. Everybody's going to be happy. That matters. And that's what's happened. And I'll talk about this too. The yield curve, for anybody who sees news stories about this, is getting very close to predicting a recession. That's where our 10-year and our short-term, I think 1-2 year bonds, both end up having the same yield. They give out the same amount of money for how much they're worth. So there's no incentive to have a longer-term bond than there is a shorter-term bond, which causes problems. That's been a large predictor of recessions in the past. People are seeing it coming, so we'll see to the degree that we can try to avoid something like that. But with all the trade wars, I don't think a bad economy really hurts this particular president because of how much of his support exists because of our advances in science over the last couple hundred years, and how many of them are older and don't work but keep voting. So we'll see. That's one of those things that I'm not sure about, because we're moving into kind of demographically uncharted territory. And when older people vote at a rate that's 5 times younger people, this huge young generation doesn't do much until it starts to vote, and people don't tend to vote until they get older. So we have this large generation of old white people who have a lot of money and see the country changing before their eyes, and somebody gives them a solution, and that's what we're seeing now, and how that solution comes out. That's why I'm so worried about this, because and we saw this too this last week, and I posted this, another thing that talked about a little bit about German society before things went totally fucking leftward, or people will probably bust me on that later. Went crazy there, right? Because they didn't start. You don't start with gas chambers. You start with a good, law-abiding, patriotic populace that just wants to do well for themselves and their family. And you take that and you twist it, and that's what we're seeing now. And I don't like where that road goes. Hence the show. So, the civility debate. Let me end this real quick. Trump was a birther. This debate is over. There was nothing civil about that. Obama was the most civil, most courteous and polite. He was to an infuriating, not infuriating, but a annoying degree to someone like myself, where it's like you can't keep doing that because they don't respect that. And that's one of the things that I don't think he ever quite got about Republicans, is they don't actually respect that. If they make fun of you and talk your shit and you just take it and are nice back to them, they respect you less than if you had actually fought back. There's a story it's called Why I'm Not a Democrat. I need to link to it, and I'm trying to think who it was. It's one of the old Texas Guard who knows that the Republican Party is full of shit, but he's not a Democrat and won't call himself a Democrat because they don't fight for stuff. And he's talking about it too, and I've seen this too, and I get a lot of shit for this, which is fine, because whatever, I am what I am. I've always felt that that's been somewhat missing from that left. Fighting is not, and this is for someone like me, right, that's what I do with my friends. I mean, that's what, like, football is. It's a controlled fight. Fighting isn't necessarily in and of itself a bad thing, per se. You can get some good stuff out of that. So fighting back and doing that isn't necessarily, to my mind, an inherently negative process, right? Some good things can come out of competition. So I do think that Dems need to be fighting harder, and have needed to for a while. And I think that's becoming more clear, as opposed to, if we're just nicer, they'll be nicer. Because I don't think that worked. I think that was proven very wrong. I think Mitch McConnell has taken that and done horrible things to it that are illegal everywhere else but where he's getting away with it, which is in Congress. Paul Ryan in 2012 stood behind a guy who was bragging about how he denied service to the vice president, and Paul Ryan was laughing and smiling and all that. And now they're trying to get on this horse that they think is incredibly high, but I think most people know doesn't really exist and is actually some ugly pony that they're riding backwards. Anyway, science news: dust storm on Mars, still killing opportunity. That thing's been there for over a decade. It is solar powered. It is probably not going to make it. One of the things that happens with the solar power and the batteries is they have to have enough power to heat themselves up to charge, because when they get too cold, they can't charge. And so you have to have that at least enough power to stay there. So we'll see if it survives. It's been pretty amazing. And it might just go to sleep, and then later some dust storm blows it off, and then randomly we start getting signals from Mars. How cool. That's why we need more science stuff. Need more probes out there. And unfortunately, this happened during the Bush years too, when they were so much in with the oil industry and against the science. The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Association, I think I've got that wrong, NOAA, they're not going to do climate change stuff anymore, and they can't talk about climate anymore. These are the people who monitor a lot of our satellites that we put up to do this. So that it's going to get really weird on that. And this is another one of those things that the longer that they have more power. So just to give you an example, the EPA now has a rule that if you get any grant money from the EPA to do, say, environmental cleanup or anything like that, or if you're an exporter doing any kind of environmental research where there's any kind of grant involved that came from the EPA, and you're an expert in that field, you can't be on any scientific expertise panel in the EPA. So what this does is basically disqualifies every scientist in the country who's of any merit and has gotten any kind of grant from the government. And whoa, look at that. All those industry experts, they don't get government grants. So you guys can all come on the panel. Huh, what a coinky-dink. So you don't have any science experts and you've got a bunch of industry folks. Because of that simple rule. And so that's what's happening in a lot of places. And the degree to which it's going to take to dig us out of this is, I mean, the longer you dig down, right? It takes that much longer to dig out. So the big dig out, of course, is coming up in November. So make sure you are registered to vote. And don't vote for Republicans, obviously. And then we'll see how that goes. But tough week. No reason to give up. It's still a beautiful world. And the sun keeps going around it. So anyway, I'm going to be done for the night. So thanks everybody for dropping by. I always appreciate it. And have a great week. And I'll see you next week, maybe. We'll see. We've had a nice little run here. We're about halfway through on the backlog for our other uploads and still working on some of the other edits and stuff. So maybe by the end of the year, we'll take this to another level. But we'll see. All right, so peace out, y'all, and have a good night. And a good week. And be good, and as Connie would say, be kind. I've got an angry mind, but I'm a kind guy. It's a weird thing. Anyway, you guys have a good night, and I'll talk to you later. Peace out.